Ethan Carter slammed the eviction notice onto the marina office desk so hard the coffee mug cracked. 41 years old, a dead wife, a daughter who deserved better. And now this. But the paper that destroyed him wasn't the bank letter. It was the handwritten note tucked underneath it in handwriting he recognized. I turned down the job. Don't ask me why yet.
What did Anante say?
He stood there, hands shaking, staring at 6 words that rearranged everything he thought he knew about the woman across the harbor. The woman he'd laughed at. The woman he'd warned would never find love. And somewhere in Charleston tonight, she was waiting to see if he'd finally figured it out. Drop a comment with your city. Let me see how far this story has traveled. And if nobody's told you lately, subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The morning Olivia Bennett pulled her truck into the cottage driveway across the harbor, Ethan Carter didn't notice. He was underneath the hull of a 1967 Chris Craft covered in fiberglass dust, arguing with a bolt that had been stripped since the Clinton administration. His radio was playing Merle Haggard at a volume that made conversation impossible, which was exactly how he liked it. No conversations meant no complications. No complications meant he could get through another day without thinking too hard about the shape of the empty chair at his kitchen table. His daughter Emma noticed, though. She was 12, sharp as a tack, and possessed of the unsettling habit of appearing silently at his elbow when he least expected it. Dad, hand me the half-inch socket. Dad, someone's moving into the Whitfield cottage. Socket Emma. She placed it in his palm. He grunted. She didn't move. It's a woman, Emma added. She's carrying a drafting table by herself. It looks really heavy. People move. Socket worked. She dropped one of the legs in the harbor. That made him roll out from under the hull. Dippo. He squinted across the water. Sure enough, there was a woman standing at the edge of the dock, peering down into the green-brown water of Charleston Harbor, with her hands on her hips, and the calm, analytical expression of someone who was already problem-solving rather than panicking. She was wearing a faded University of South Carolina t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a knot that was doing its best to stay together. A wooden table leg bobbed against the dock piling below her. She glanced up, caught him looking, and raised one hand in a brief, no-nonsense wave. Not the kind that asked for help, just the kind that acknowledged she'd been seen. Ethan raised his chin slightly, looked back at the hull. She'll figure it out, he said. She's been standing there for 2 minutes. Then she'll figure it out in another 2 minutes. Emma made a sound that was eerily similar to something her mother used to make a small, almost imperceptible exhale that communicated an entire paragraph of disappointment. Then she walked to the edge of his dock, cupped her hands around her mouth, and shouted, I have a boat hook if you need it. Ethan closed his eyes. The woman across the harbor shouted back, That would be incredible, thank you. He was on his feet before he'd made the conscious decision to stand. Her name was Olivia Bennett. She was 36, originally from Annapolis, Maryland, recently relocated from Boston. She was a marine architect, which Ethan had never heard of as a career, and told her so with the directness of a man who'd spent 15 years talking mostly to boats. It's exactly what it sounds like, she said, accepting the boat hook from Emma and using it to retrieve the table leg with practiced efficiency. I design structures that exist at the intersection of water and land. Docks, seawalls, coastal rescue stations, the kind of things people don't think about until they desperately need them. What brings you to Charleston? Emma asked. Contract with the city, redesigning the Northern Harbor rescue infrastructure. She shook the table leg dry and looked at it critically. 3-year project, maybe longer depending on funding. I needed somewhere close to the water. You picked the right harbor, Emma said. So it seems. She smiled at Emma, a real warm smile, not the polished professional kind, and then glanced at Ethan. I appreciate the loan. I'll get the hook back to you. Keep it, Ethan said. We have 3. It was the most generous thing he'd said to a stranger in 4 years, and it surprised him slightly. He turned back toward the shop before the surprise could show on his face. He didn't think about her for 3 days. This was intentional. Ethan Carter had become very good at not thinking about things. It was a skill he'd developed in the 18 months after his wife Sarah passed, not from illness, not from accident, but from an aneurysm that took her between one Wednesday morning and the next, without warning, without the mercy of preparation. She'd been 34 years old. She'd been making pancakes. The maple syrup was still on the counter when he came home to a house that had stopped being a home.
Babamgo.
He didn't think about Sarah either most days. He'd built walls around that the way you board up windows before a hurricane, not because you believe the storm won't come, but because you need something between you and the full force of it. He worked. He raised Emma. He fixed boats. It was enough. He told himself it was enough so often it had stopped sounding like a lie, which was the closest thing to peace he'd managed. On the 4th morning after the table leg incident, he walked out of his shop at 6:15 to find Olivia Bennett crouched at the far end of his main dock, examining a section of decking with a flashlight and a look of intense professional concern. He stopped. "Can I help you?" he said. She looked up, not remotely embarrassed. "Your third dock post on the starboard side is compromised. Marine borer damage. You can see the channeling if you get the light at the right angle. It'll hold through the summer probably, but if you get a good storm season, it becomes a liability issue." He stared at her. "I wasn't trying to intrude," she said, standing up and brushing off her knees. "I was doing an early site walk for the rescue station project, and I cut through your marina. I noticed the post. I notice things like that. And you thought you'd just crouch on my dock at 6 in the morning. I thought I'd note the problem in case you wanted to know." She tilted her head slightly. "Do you want to know?" Against his better judgment, he said, "Show me." No, she showed him. She was right. The post had to be replaced before fall, and the way she explained it, the biology of marine borers, the stress distribution on aging timber. The specific failure pattern he should watch for was precise without being condescending. She knew what she was talking about. She knew it better than he did in an area adjacent to his own expertise, and she shared the information without making him feel small for not having caught it himself. He didn't like how much he respected that. "I can recommend a supplier," she said. "The pressure-treated marine-grade stuff, not the hardware store version. Difference in lifespan is about 15 years. "I know the difference," he said. "Of course you do." She handed him the flashlight. She'd produced it from her jacket pocket, without him noticing, and started back down the dock. "Enjoy your morning, Mr. Carter." "Ethan," he said before he'd decided to. She glanced back. "Olivia." He watched her walk away, and then looked down at his dock post, and thought she was right, and I didn't see it, and I look at this dock every single day. He wasn't sure why that bothered him as much as it did. By the end of June, she was showing up the way weather shows up, not invited, not precisely unwelcome, just there. A set of revised loading calculations appeared on his workbench one afternoon with a sticky note. Thought these might be useful for the Hendricks restoration. Current specs seem light for the new engine. Oh. She was right about that too. He used the calculations. He didn't thank her in person because she wasn't there when he discovered she was right, and by the time he saw her again, it felt too late and too small to say. He heard her voice more than he saw her across the harbor in the early mornings, talking on the phone in the quick, efficient shorthand of someone who managed a dozen things at once. The occasional laugh, clear and sudden, like it had surprised her. Emma started waving at her every morning from the end of their dock. Olivia always waved back. She remembered, "I have a science fair in October," Emma mentioned one evening at dinner. She asked what my project was. Ethan pushed his green beans around. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was doing tidal flow patterns, and she got this look on her face like I'd said a magic word, and she asked if I'd considered using a computational fluid dynamics model." Emma paused. I didn't know what that was. Did she explain it? For about 45 minutes. Emma smiled. She's really smart, Dad. She's a professional. She also asked how you were doing. He looked up from his plate. Why? Emma shrugged with the particular elaborate casualness of a 12-year-old who knows exactly what she's doing. I think she was being polite. Tell her I'm fine. You could tell her yourself. He looked back at his green beans. I'm aware of that. The joke happened on a Tuesday evening in mid-July, and he would replay it more times than he would ever admit. He was on the community dock replacing the post Olivia had flagged. He'd finally gotten around to it, and she was nearby sketching something in one of the large format notebooks she carried everywhere, her legs dangling off the edge of the dock. The sun was coming down low and gold over the harbor, and the air smelled like salt and creosote and the particular kind of summer evening that makes a man feel things he'd rather not examine. Tommy Garrett, who had a slip at the marina and the social intuition of a particularly dim golden retriever, had stopped to talk on his way to his boat. He'd said something about the upcoming charity regatta. He'd said something else about how Olivia was always everywhere, helping everyone fixing this, advising that, showing up at the Historical Society meeting to assess the old boathouse structure. Wasn't that something? And Ethan not thinking, not planning. Filling dead air the way men do who haven't learned the art of silence said it. At this rate, you'll never get married, Bennett. You're too busy taking care of everybody else. He meant it as a joke. The kind of easy teasing that passes between people who've reached a comfortable familiarity. It landed as easy teasing. Tommy laughed. Olivia looked up from her notebook, and she smiled. Not the polite professional smile, not the quick warm smile she gave Emma, but something slower and more specific. A smile that meant something. Maybe, she said, that's because I keep waiting for the right person to notice. She looked at him when she said it, not at Tommy. At him. Then she looked back down at her notebook. Tommy said something about the weather. Ethan nodded. He kept working the post wrench with the mechanical focus of a man who has suddenly lost the ability to process where his hands are and what they're doing, because his entire conscious mind has been redirected to a single question. Did she just... Was that... That wasn't... He finished the post. He said goodnight to Tommy. He walked back to his shop, closed the door, and stood in the quiet for a long time with his hands at his sides. Emma found him there 20 minutes later. Dad, dinner's been ready for... She stopped. You okay? Fine. She looked at him carefully, the way she'd started looking at him since she turned 12, like she was reading something written in small print. You look like you're thinking too hard about something. Just tired. She let it go. She was a good kid. She let things go when he needed them. Let go. He ate dinner. He washed up. He went to bed. He did not sleep for a very long time. The problem was not that he was attracted to Olivia Bennett. The problem was that he knew exactly why he couldn't let himself be. He'd loved Sarah with the uncomplicated certainty of a man who'd found his fixed point, the person around whom everything else organized itself. When she died, the organizing principle went with her. He'd spent 4 years rebuilding a life that didn't need an organizing principle. A life that ran on routine and responsibility and the small daily satisfactions of work done well. If he let himself need someone again, he didn't finish the thought. He was practiced at not finishing that thought. But he lay in the dark and thought about the way she'd looked at him specific direct, without any of the protective irony he'd used to launch the joke, and something shifted in his chest that he couldn't quite push back down. Not love. He wasn't ready to call it that. But the memory of what love felt like, which he was beginning to fear be just as dangerous. The next morning she brought coffee. He was at the workbench when she knocked on the open shop door, actual knocking, which she'd never done before, which made him look up. She was holding 2 cups from the place on King Street. She knew his order. He didn't know when he'd told her his order. He wasn't sure he had. "Peace offering," she said. "I wasn't sure if last night landed weird." He took the coffee. It didn't. Good. She leaned against the doorframe. "Because I meant it." The words sat in the air between them. He wrapped both hands around the cup. "Olivia, you don't have to say anything," she said immediately. "I'm not asking you to. I'm just—" She stopped, started again. "I'm not in the habit of pretending things aren't what they are. It makes me bad at small talk. My therapist says it's a feature, not a bug." He almost smiled at that. "I'm not in a place," he started. "I know," she said. "I'm not pushing. I'm just being honest about where I'm standing." She straightened up from the doorframe. "The rest is yours to figure out, at whatever speed you need." She started to leave. "How did you know my coffee order?" he asked. She looked back over her shoulder. "Emma told me. About 3 weeks ago. I asked." She left. He stood there holding the coffee that was exactly right and thought about a woman who'd asked his daughter what he liked to drink, not to impress him, not as a move, but because she paid attention to the people she cared about. She paid attention the way some people breathe automatically, completely without performance. He knew what that meant about her. He was terrified of knowing. He drank the coffee anyway. It was the best cup he'd had in 4 years, which felt in a way he couldn't entirely explain, like the most frightening thing that had happened to him in a long, long time. The coffee sat on his workbench for the rest of that morning like a small accusation. He kept looking at it between cuts. Not drinking it, just aware of it, the way you're aware of something that doesn't quite belong in a space you've controlled very carefully for a very long time. It was the right temperature, the right order. It had been brought by someone who had quietly learned him without making a production of it, and that bothered him in a way he couldn't sand down or torque into submission the way he could every other problem that came through his shop door. Well, he finished the hull section he was working on. He cleaned his tools in the exact order he always cleaned them. He walked to the door of the shop and looked across the harbor toward the Whitfield cottage and told himself he was checking the weather. The cottage windows were dark. Her truck was gone. She was already out on the water somewhere doing the work that had brought her to Charleston in the first place, and she had not spent the morning standing in a shop thinking about him. He was certain of that. Olivia Bennett did not seem like a woman who spent time waiting on other people's slowness to catch up. That should have been a relief. It was not entirely a relief. He went back inside and finally drank the coffee cold now and thought about what she'd said. "I'm just being honest about where I'm standing. The rest is yours to figure out." He'd heard lines like that before from well-meaning friends from his sister in Savannah, who called every few months to ask if he was seeing anyone from the grief counselor he'd seen twice after Sarah died, before deciding that talking about it made it larger, not smaller. But Olivia hadn't said it the way people say things they want you to do something about. She'd said it the way you state a fact about a tide table because it's true, because it matters, and because the water will do what the water does regardless of whether you've acknowledged it. He rinsed the cup. He went back to work. He did not let himself think about her for the rest of the day, which meant he thought about her approximately every 11 minutes and was furious with himself each time. It was the beginning of August when Emma started spending real time with her. He didn't plan it. He didn't permit it exactly. It happened the way things happen with 12-year-olds who have decided something incrementally, cheerfully, and with total commitment. Emma had knocked on Olivia's door one Saturday morning with her science fair notebook under her arm and a question about computational fluid dynamics, and Olivia had apparently opened the door, looked at the notebook and said, "Give me 20 minutes to make tea, and we'll work through it." That had been 3 weeks ago. Now it was a standing Saturday arrangement. Ethan knew about it because Emma told him matter-of-factly the way she told him about homework and soccer practice and what was happening in the book she was reading. She wasn't hiding it. She wasn't making it into something. She was simply living her life the way 12-year-olds do, taking warmth where she found it without the complicated machinery of adult self-protection getting in the way. He told himself this was fine. It was fine. Olivia was a responsible adult. Emma was a sensible kid. There was nothing happening except a woman with expertise in a subject his daughter was interested in giving a kid some Saturday morning encouragement on a school project. That was it. That was all. He believed this for exactly 2 weeks. Then he came home on a Thursday evening late because the Hendrix engine had thrown a belt at 4:30, and he'd had to source a replacement, and found Emma and Olivia sitting at his kitchen table with graph paper, a laptop, and the particular comfortable silence of two people who have been working together long enough to stop narrating every step. Olivia had her reading glasses on, which he hadn't known she wore. Emma had her tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth the way she did when she was concentrating. There were 2 mugs of hot chocolate on the table and the remains of what appeared to have been grilled cheese sandwiches. Olivia looked up first. "Sorry, Emma said it was okay to come in. The door was unlocked. I brought the title data set she needed, and it was easier to show her here than carry the laptop to the cottage." "It's fine." He said the same way he'd been saying it's fine for the past 3 weeks, meaning something more complicated than fine. "We figured out the computational model," Emma said without looking up. "Olivia says my hypothesis is actually really interesting. She said most college students don't think about tidal asymmetry at this level." "She's not wrong," Olivia said. "Your kid has a genuinely scientific mind." Something moved in his chest, that particular warmth that belongs only to hearing your child praised by someone who means it. He set his tool bag down by the door. "Did you two eat?" "I made sandwiches," Olivia said. "There's one left in the pan if you want it." I turned the burner off. She'd made sandwiches in his kitchen. She'd turned his burner off. She was sitting at his table with his daughter's project spread between them, wearing reading glasses he hadn't known she owned. And the thing that struck him, the thing that stopped him in the middle of his own kitchen, was how natural it looked. How exactly right the shape of it was. How much it looked like something he hadn't let himself picture in 4 years. No. He went to the pan. He ate the sandwich standing up with his back half turned because he needed a moment where no one could read his face. "I should go," Olivia said behind him. He heard the scrape of the chair, the closing of the laptop. "Emma's got everything she needs to run the next simulation. You know where I am if you get stuck." She added to Emma, clearly to Emma, and then to him. "Night, Ethan." "Night," he said. The door closed. Emma was already back to her graph paper. She didn't say a word. She was. Ethan was increasingly convinced one of the most perceptive human beings currently living in the state of South Carolina, and her silence on the subject of Olivia Bennett was a calculated and devastating strategy. He washed the pan. He did not say anything either. He was losing a game he hadn't agreed to play. The second week of August brought a heat that settled over Charleston, like something with weight and intention, and with it came the Charleston Heritage Harbor Association's annual dock inspection, a bureaucratic ritual that managed to create enormous anxiety for every marina owner in the county, while accomplishing approximately nothing. Ethan had been through 8 of these. He knew exactly what to expect. He pulled his documentation together, made sure his float plan and vessel registrations were current, and showed up to the inspection office on a Tuesday morning with his paperwork in order and his expectations appropriately low. The inspector assigned to his section was new. A young guy named Marcus, who was thorough in the anxious, overcompensating way of someone who's afraid of missing something rather than confident in what he knows. He flagged 4 items on the North Dock that Ethan was 90% sure were fine. He cited a section of the Harbor Code about structural load tolerances that Ethan had never heard referenced in 8 years of inspections. "I'm going to need an engineer's assessment on the North Dock section before I can sign off," Marcus said, capping his pen. Ethan kept his face neutral. "What kind of engineer?" "Marine structural. It needs to be somebody with coastal infrastructure certification." He stood in his marina parking lot after Marcus left and did the math in his head. A certified marine structural engineer hired on short notice in August would cost somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 he didn't have sitting loose and take 2 to 3 weeks to schedule. His North Dock was his primary working dock. Without the signed inspection, he couldn't legally run full operations. He stood there for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. He scrolled to her name. His thumb hovered for what felt like a very long time. He put the phone back in his pocket and walked to the shop. He lasted 40 minutes before Emma appeared in the doorway on a Tuesday morning, which meant she'd come straight from the bus stop holding his phone out to him. "You should call her," Emma said. He looked at the phone. "How do you know about the dock inspection?" "Tommy Garrett told me when I walked past the slip. He said it could shut you down." She extended the phone further. "Dad, call her." He took the phone. He called her. She answered on the second ring, which somehow made it worse. No buffer, no preparation time. Just her voice direct and clear asking what was going on, and him explaining it in the clipped shorthand of a man who hates asking for help, and her saying, "I can be there in an hour." She was there in 40 minutes. She walked the north dock with the focused precision he'd seen her use on everything structural, which was to say, she was thorough and fast, and she didn't perform the thoroughness, she just did it. She asked him 4 specific questions. She looked at 3 documents. She made 2 phone calls he wasn't party to. Then she sat down at his workbench with his inspection sheet and wrote a 4-paragraph engineering assessment on the dock's load-bearing capacity that was clear, specific, and immediately authoritative. "Marcus will accept this," she said, signing it. His concern was reasonable, but his citation was pulled from the 2009 code update. The 2017 revision changes the load tolerance threshold. Your dock passes. He took the paper. He looked at it. He looked at her. "How do I pay you?" "You don't." "Olivia." "You don't," she said again, flat and final. "You needed help. I have the certification. That's the whole transaction." "That's not Ethan?" She looked at him across the workbench with the specific patient directness that he was coming to understand was simply how she existed in the world. She didn't manage, people didn't maneuver them, just looked straight at them. "Let someone help you. Just let it be a thing that can happen." And the sentence was so simple and so precisely aimed at the exact mechanism he'd spent 4 years jamming shut that he had no response to it at all. He stood there holding her engineering assessment and feeling something crack very slightly in the wall he'd built around the part of himself that used to know how to accept things from people. "Thank you," he said. It came out rougher than he intended. "You're welcome," she said. And she left, and he submitted the assessment. The dock was cleared that afternoon. He stood on the north dock at 5 o'clock, watching the harbor settle into evening, and he thought about what it meant that she'd known exactly what to say. Not to his pride, not trying to make it easier, not softening the ask, but to the specific deep-rooted thing in him that had convinced itself that needing help was the same as losing ground. She hadn't even known she was doing it. That was the part he couldn't stop turning over. She'd just said the true thing, because she'd seen it the way she saw the compromised dock post, and the loading calculation discrepancy, and his coffee order. She paid attention to broken things. She knew how to tell a person they were worth fixing without making them feel small for needing it. He didn't sleep well again that night. He was beginning to accept that as his new normal. The Saturday that changed things was September 7th. He marked the date later not because he knew it was important when it was happening, but because Emma reminded him of it a long time afterward, with the quiet pride of someone who had watched something slow and inevitable finally arrive. He'd been on the water most of the day. A client wanted sea trials on a 1970 Bertram he'd spent the summer restoring, and the trials had run long because the client, a retired physician named Harmon, wanted to talk about every system on the boat in detail, and Ethan was too professional to rush him. He got back to the marina at 4:30, salt-dried and tired, and found Jimmy Pace from the slip 3 boats down, waiting at the dock with the expression of a man delivering news he'd rather not deliver. "Your North Float line gave out," Jimmy said. "About 2 hours ago. The Caldwell boat swung into the dock and caught the corner. Nothing's sunk but the dock fender's destroyed, and there's a scratch on the Caldwell hull that's going to need addressing." Ethan was already moving. "Where's Emma?" At the cottage, the Bennett woman saw it happen, came right over, pulled Emma back from the dock edge before the swing. It was fast, happened in about 30 seconds. Emma's fine. She's been with her since. He heard the rest of it distantly, already at a jog. He knocked on the cottage door hard enough to feel it in his knuckles. Emma opened it. She was fine, clearly. Fine, unhurt, slightly pink in the face from what he guessed had been crying earlier, and she said, "Dad, I'm okay," immediately, which meant she'd known exactly what his face looked like coming up the path. He held her for a long time without speaking. She let him. Behind her in the cottage, he could see Olivia standing at the kitchen counter with her back tactfully turned, giving him the privacy of the moment without leaving the room entirely. She'd made Emma tea. There was a blanket on the cottage couch that hadn't been there before. Bow. When he finally let Emma go, she pulled back and looked at him with red-rimmed eyes and said, "It was really loud. The swing. I didn't know what was happening." Then, Olivia grabbed me before I even knew I was too close to the edge. He looked over Emma's shoulder at Olivia. She was still facing the counter, ostensibly organizing something. She wasn't making this about herself. She wasn't turning around to receive anything for what she'd done. "Olivia," he said. She turned. He didn't have words, which was unusual for him, but the few he had felt inadequate. He said, "Thank you," and he said it differently than he'd said it after the dock assessment. Fuller. Something that cost him more. She looked at him for a moment, and what crossed her face was so genuine and unguarded that he almost had to look away. Not pride, not satisfaction. Something simpler and more vulnerable than either. "She was right there," Olivia said. "It was nothing. It wasn't nothing," he said. Emma had moved to the couch and was pulling the blanket around herself with the particular contentment of a child who has been scared and is now warm and safe and knows it. Olivia looked at her, then back at him. "Stay," she said quietly. Not an invitation with any agenda behind it. Just the word. "I was going to make dinner. There's enough." He almost said we should get home. It was right there. The familiar retreat, the automatic maintenance of the careful distance he kept between himself and anything that felt too much like what he'd lost. He looked at his daughter on the couch. He said, "Yeah, okay." It was, he realized later, the most important two-word sentence he'd said in 4 years. Dinner was soup from a pot. Olivia clearly made often the practiced economical movements of someone cooking something they know by heart. Emma fell asleep on the couch before 8. They talked the way people talk when they're not trying to impress each other or manage impressions about the work, about Charleston, about the particular satisfaction of structural problems solved. She talked about growing up near the water in Maryland, about her father who'd been a civil engineer, about the way she'd known since she was Emma's age, that she wanted to do something with how buildings and water met. He talked about Sarah. Not much, not everything, but some. He told her about the maple syrup on the counter. He didn't know why that detail. She listened the way she did everything completely without interruption, without the anxious rush to fill silence with comfort that most people couldn't resist. And when he finished, she didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she couldn't imagine. She said, "She sounds like she was someone who made everything around her better." A pause. "I can see that in Emma." He looked at his daughter sleeping on the borrowed couch. "Yeah," he said. "She got the best of her." "She got some good things from you too," Olivia said, "whether you see it or not." He left at 10, Emma half asleep on his shoulder. At the door he stopped and looked back at Olivia, standing in the lit kitchen, the way people look at things they don't know yet they're going to remember. "I'm not good at this," he said. Not an apology, just the truth offered simply. "I know," she said. "You're getting better." He walked home through the warm September night with his daughter leaning against him, and he couldn't argue with what she'd said, and that silence felt like the beginning of something he no longer had the specific will to prevent. And the problem was that knowing something and being ready for it are different by exactly the distance between the mind and the chest. He knew what Olivia was to him by the time October arrived. He knew it the way you know a storm is coming, before the sky has changed something in the air, something in the pressure, something in the particular quality of how ordinary things look when everything is about to be different. He wasn't ready. He kept not being ready. He kept showing up anyway at the dock at dinner, twice more at Emma's soccer games, where Olivia appeared twice in the small crowd without announcement, and cheered at the right moments because Emma had mentioned the schedule. He kept accepting the help she offered without making it into more than she was offering. He kept not saying the thing. And she kept not pushing him. That was the part that undid him most in the quiet moments. A different person would have pressed, would have named it, demanded an answer, applied the reasonable adult pressure of wanting to know where something was going. Olivia did not do that. She was simply there, consistent, warm, paying attention, and her patience was not passive. It was a choice she was making visibly, deliberately, every single day. He was not sure he deserved that kind of patience. He was becoming increasingly afraid that it didn't matter whether he deserved it. It was being offered anyway, freely, by someone who had looked at his grief and his walls, and his too careful life, and decided to show up in spite of it. He stood on his dock on the last evening of October, the harbor going gray and choppy with the first real cold front of the season, and he thought, you are going to lose her if you keep standing here. He thought it clearly without softening. He let it be true. Then his phone buzzed with a weather alert. The forecast had changed. A tropical system in the Gulf had accelerated overnight. It was heading northeast. It was heading toward Charleston. And everything that came next would happen much faster than Ethan Carter was ready for. The alert came through at 11:17 on a Thursday night, and by Friday morning, the whole coast knew it was serious. Hurricane Miriam had stalled over warm Gulf water for 36 hours, fed itself into a Category 3, and then turned northeast with the kind of decisive acceleration that meteorologists describe in careful technical language and coastal residents describe in profanity. Landfall was projected for Sunday evening somewhere between Savannah and the northern edge of the Outer Banks. Charleston was sitting directly in the cone. Ethan was already at the marina at 5:30 Friday morning when the first of his slip renters started calling. He had 22 boats in his care, some belonging to people who were already 3 states inland, some belonging to people who didn't understand yet what was coming, and some belonging to people like Tommy Garrett, who showed up at 6 a.m. with coffee and the stubborn, cheerful helplessness of a man who knew nothing about storm preparation but wanted to be useful. "Tell me what to do," Tommy said. "Start pulling the canvas covers off the bayliner in slip 4. Fold them, don't roll them, and stack them in the dry room. I need every sail cover, every bimini, every piece of canvas that can turn into a sail in 50-knot wind off this marina before noon." Tommy was already moving. Ethan turned to the dock and started the calculation in his head, which boats could be hauled which needed extra lines, which were too low in the water, which owners he still needed to reach. He'd done this twice before. He knew the math. He also knew that the math never fully accounted for the variables you couldn't see until the storm was already on top of you. He was on his 3rd phone call when he heard boots on the dock behind him and turned. Olivia was in her work gear, waterproof jacket, worn boots, hair back, carrying a rolled set of drawings under one arm and a radio in her other hand. She looked at him the way she'd looked at his compromised dock post in August, with the clear, unrushed focus of someone who has already assessed the situation and is ready to work. "I'm not going anywhere," she said before he could speak. "Don't ask me to." He looked at her for a moment. "I wasn't going to ask you to." Something shifted in her expression, quick and small, and then gone. "Good," she said. "Where do you need me?" He needed her everywhere. He put her on structural assessment first. The north dock, the finger piers, the bulkhead section on the south end that he'd been meaning to reinforce since July and hadn't gotten to. She moved through it fast, called him on the radio twice with specific concerns, and had a written priority list in his hand by 8 a.m. That was better organized than anything he could have produced while simultaneously managing 11 boat owners and a delivery of storm strapping that arrived at the wrong dock. Emma was with his sister Janet in Savannah. He'd made that call first at 5 a.m. before anything else. Janet had driven up Thursday night without being asked because Janet knew what a Cat 3 looked like and what it did to her brother's equilibrium. Emma had gone without fighting him on it, which told him she understood the seriousness, and she'd hugged him at the truck door and said, "Be careful." And he'd said, "I will," and they'd both known he wasn't promising anything he could guarantee. He hadn't told Emma that Olivia was staying. He wasn't sure why. He filed that question away for after. By noon Friday, the marina was as ready as it was going to get. 12 boats hauled and dry. The remaining 10 double-lined and spring-lined with every trick Ethan knew. Canvas off everything cleats checked, loose equipment stowed. The dry room was packed floor to ceiling. The shop was locked with plywood screwed over the windows. Olivia had worked for 6 hours straight without stopping for anything except 2 cups of coffee she'd produced from somewhere and handed him without comment. She knew which tasks needed doing before he assigned them. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had done emergency structural work before under pressure and knew how to manage her own energy for the long version of a crisis rather than the short one. At 12:15, she sat down on an overturned dock box and ate half a granola bar. He sat next to her. He ate the other half without asking. She let him have it. "You've done storm prep before," he said. "Cape Cod, 2019. We had a nor'easter come in faster than forecast while I was on a seawall project. Lost 2 weeks of work and almost lost the access road." She looked out at the harbor. "You learn to move fast or you learn the hard way." "Which did you do?" "Both. Mostly the hard way first." A pause. "You're good at this, managing all of it at once." "I've had practice." "I know." She said it quietly, not referring to the storms. He looked at the water. "Thank you for staying." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "It hasn't hit us." She was right about that. Miriam made landfall Sunday at 8:47 p.m., 18 miles south-southwest of Charleston, and she arrived with the particular ferocity of a storm that has been underestimated. The final track had wobbled south at the last hour, which meant the northern eye wall, the strongest quadrant, came directly over the harbor. The forecast had said 55-knot sustained winds. The anemometer on the marina building read 68 before it stopped reading anything at all. Ethan spent the storm in the shop with a battery radio, a flashlight, and the precise, controlled dread of a man who knows exactly what wind and water can do to things he's spent years building. He'd done everything he could do. What was coming now was beyond management. It was only endurance. At 10:15, his phone lit up. A text from Olivia North Bulkhead. The old section. "If the surge gets above 4 feet, it's going to go. I reinforced it Friday, but the footer may not hold." He typed back, "Where are you?" "Cottage. Windows holding. You. Shop. Stay there." A pause. Then, obviously. Despite everything, the wind shaking the building, the sound of something large hitting the roof. The radio announcing storm surge warnings up and down the coast. He almost smiled at that word. Obviously. Said with the dry, settled confidence of a woman who did not need to be told to stay out of a hurricane. The surge came at midnight. He knew it was coming because the harbor went quieter first, that strange pause before the water moves, and then he heard it, not crashing, but rising, the sound of water filling spaces it wasn't supposed to fill, persistent and indifferent and vast. He lost 2 boats. The McAllister sloop in slip 7 had a line, part 1 line, the weakest one, the one he'd double-checked and flagged and double-checked again, and she swung into the ferry dock section and stove in her port quarter before the second line stopped her. The Hendricks Bertram, the one he'd spent the summer restoring, the one he'd done the sea trials on, the one Dr. Harmon had talked about for 3 hours on a sun-warmed afternoon, that now felt like it belonged to a different life. took storm surge through a compromised through hull that he hadn't found in preparation because it was above the waterline until it wasn't. She settled at the dock in 18 inches of water over her soul before the automatic bilge pump screamed itself out. He found both of them at first light in the flat, exhausted calm that follows a major storm. He stood on the dock in the gray Monday morning and looked at the Bertram sitting low and wrong in her slip, and felt the specific grief of someone who has watched something they built and cared for get destroyed by forces they couldn't stop. Olivia appeared at his shoulder sometime in the next few minutes. He didn't hear her coming. She stood beside him and looked at the Bertram, and didn't say anything, and her silence was the right kind, not uncomfortable, not waiting to be filled, just present. "She's insurable," he said finally. "Yes. The hull's probably okay below the waterline. It's the interior." "I know. The McAllister's worse." "I saw." "Why?" He looked at the full extent of it, the dock damage, the debris, the two compromised boats, the section of bulkhead that had shifted despite everything. The business calculation was already running in the back of his mind. Cold and precise repair costs. Insurance deductibles, lost revenue during haul-out client relations. The numbers were bad. Not catastrophic probably, but bad enough to make the next 6 months very thin. "I need to start making calls," he said. "I'll handle the bulkhead assessment. You focus on the boats and the clients." He looked at her. She was already pulling out her notebook, already moving toward the south end of the marina with the same purposeful calm she'd had at 6 a.m. Friday. She hadn't slept, or hadn't slept much. He could see it, but she was here, and she was functional, and she was without ceremony or discussion, working his crisis like it was her own. Something happened in his chest that he recognized and immediately tried to put back where it had come from. He went to make his calls. The next 5 days were the hardest kind of work. Not the physical kind, though there was plenty of that, but the kind that requires holding multiple complicated things at once. Insurance adjusters, client phone calls, contractors for the bulkhead, a haul-out schedule for the Bertram, a conversation with Dr. Harmon that was genuinely one of the harder calls Ethan had made in years, during which Harmon said, "These things happen, son. You did everything right." And Ethan had to stand very still and breathe through his nose and not let his voice do anything unprofessional. Olivia was there through all of it. Bumpukisi. Not in his way. Not hovering. Not making herself necessary in ways that felt like pressure. She was just there doing the things she could do, the structural documentation for the insurance claim, which saved him 4 days of assessment fees. A conversation with the city harbor inspector that she navigated with the calm authority of someone who speaks the language fluently. An evening where she showed up at his shop with 2 bags of takeout from a place on East Bay that she'd clearly chosen for the specific reason that it was his favorite, which Emma must have told her, and which she delivered without mentioning because that was how she did things. She was sitting across from him in the shop at 7:30 on Thursday evening, both of them going through damaged documentation by the light of a work lamp because the power was still out in half the marina, and he looked up from a photograph of the bulkhead footer and said without planning to, "Why are you still here?" She looked at him over the photographs. "What? It's been 5 days. Your project is on hold. Half the harbor is still without power. There's nothing architecturally interesting about what's left of my dock. So why are you still here?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because you need help." "I've been handling crises on my own for 4 years." "I know you have." She set down her photograph. "Doesn't mean you should have to." "Olivia, why does it bother you?" she asked. The question was direct and genuine, not an argument. "Why does someone being here bother you? Tell me the actual reason." He opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the work lamp because it was easier than looking at her, and the words came out in the rough, grudging way that truth comes out of men who have spent years sitting on it. "Because you could leave," he said. "That's the reason. You're here until you're not. And the longer you're here, the more—" He stopped. "The more it matters when you go." The silence that followed that was different from the earlier silences. It had weight. "Ethan," she said, "I know what I'm saying." He looked at her. "I know exactly what I'm saying, and I know it's not your problem. It's mine. It's been mine since the morning I found you on my dock at 6 a.m., and you were right about the post." "The post," she repeated with a quiet incredulity that wasn't mocking, more like disbelief at the specific detail. "You were right, and I hadn't seen it, and I look at that dock every single day." He said it like the confession it was. "That's when I knew I was in trouble." She didn't move. She was watching him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Or maybe he had, and hadn't let himself read it. Careful. Open. Something that was holding itself very still. "I'm not Sarah," she said. "I know you know that. But I'm also not someone who shows up and then leaves Ethan. That's not who I am. I left Boston for a 3-year contract because I was tired of transient. I'm tired of moving through places without landing in them. I'm here because Charleston feels like somewhere I want to be." A pause. "Partly because of the work. Partly because of Emma." Another pause, shorter. "Partly because of you. And I'm not going to pretend that's not true just to make it easier for you to keep your distance." His jaw tightened. "I'm not asking you to pretend anything." "No," she said. "But you're asking me to be patient with something that is starting to cost me too." That landed. He felt it land. "What does that mean?" he asked, quieter. "Men." She exhaled the first time in their whole conversation that she'd looked anything other than steady. "It means I've been showing up for 5 months. It means I see you every day, and I watch you almost let it be something, and then pull back, and I understand why I do. I understand exactly why. But understanding why doesn't make it not hurt." She looked at him straight. "I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm just telling you the truth. Because I promised myself a long time ago I wouldn't stop doing that." He sat with that. She let him sit with it. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay what?" "Okay, I hear you." It wasn't enough. He knew it wasn't enough. He could see on her face that she knew it too. But something had shifted in the room, or in him, which amounted to the same thing. The thing he'd been sitting on for 5 months had been named by both of them, at least partially, in the rough and honest and imperfect way that real things get named by people who aren't practiced at this. She went back to the photographs. He went back to the photographs. They finished the documentation in the quiet of the work lamp and the distant sound of generators running somewhere in the marina. At 9 o'clock she stood up to leave. At the door she stopped without turning around. "For what it's worth," she said, "the post thing was impressive. Most boat guys, they know the water, but they stop at the water line. You think in systems, you always have." She left. He sat in the shop for a long time afterward. He thought about what she'd said. Not the vulnerable part, though, that turned over and over in him, but the last part. "You think in systems." She'd been paying attention to how he thought, not just what he did. She'd been watching him the same way he'd been watching her cataloging and carrying, and the symmetry of it hit him with a force that the hurricane, for all its Category 3 fury, had not quite managed. He was in love with her. Yita. He wasn't ready. He was terrified. Every cell of self-preservation he'd built in the years since Sarah was screaming at him to back away from the ledge. He was in love with her anyway. And then, because the universe has a particular sense of timing that operates entirely without regard for human readiness, he made the mistake. He stopped answering her texts. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Gradually, the way a man retreats when he knows he's losing ground and doesn't have a better strategy. A slower reply here, a missed call there, a morning on the dock where she walked past, and he found a reason to be on the phone. He told himself he was giving them both space. He told himself he needed time to think. And what he was actually doing was exactly what she'd said he would do. He was running. He was doing the thing he'd done with every good thing that had gotten close enough to threaten the structure of the life he'd built around his grief, which was to put distance between himself and the thing before the thing could leave him first. Olivia did not call him out on it. She did not chase him. She let him go, and the letting go was so quiet and so dignified that it made him feel worse than any argument would have. 3 weeks passed. The marina repairs progressed. The insurance claim moved through its stages. The Bertram was hauled, and the interior gutted, and the through hull fixed. Work continued because work was the one thing that didn't require him to figure out what he was feeling. It just required him to show up and use his hands. Emma came home from Savannah with Janet and was told that everything was fine, and didn't believe it for a single day. She watched him for a week before she said anything. On a Sunday evening, while they were doing dishes after dinner, a task they'd done together in the same kitchen 1,000 times, in the comfortable rhythm of a father and daughter who'd learned to share a small space. Emma handed him a plate and said quietly and without preamble, "She's not the reason Mom died." He froze. Emma kept her eyes on the dish she was drying. "I know you know that. I know you think you're protecting yourself. But you're not protecting yourself, Dad. You're punishing her for something she never did." A pause. "And you're punishing yourself for being alive." He stood very still with the plate in his hand and felt something move through him that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite relief. Something that belongs to the exact moment when a wall you've maintained for a very long time develops a crack you can no longer pretend isn't there. "Emma," he said. "Mom died because life was unfair," she said. "Not because you loved her. Loving someone didn't get her killed. Loving Olivia won't get her killed either." Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, just enough.
So,
He set the plate down on the counter and turned and looked at his daughter, his 12-year-old daughter who had lost her mother at 8, who had spent 4 years watching her father hold the world at arm's length, who had, in the months since Olivia arrived, slowly remembered what it felt like to have someone extra in the house who knew her name and her project and her coffee preference and her schedule, and the full weight of what he'd been protecting and what it had cost hit him all at once. He was not only protecting himself. He'd been protecting a story he'd told himself about love and loss that wasn't true. And his daughter at 12 years old had just told him so with more clarity and courage than he'd managed in 4 years. He pulled her in and held her the way he hadn't held her since the night of the storm, tight and complete the way you hold someone when you're grateful they exist. "You're right," he said into the top of her head. "I know," she said, muffled against his shoulder. Then, "Dad, you're kind of squishing me." He let go. She wiped her eyes with the dish towel and looked at him with the composed, slightly embarrassed expression of a 12-year-old who has just said something important and would now like everyone to please act normal. "So," she said, "are you going to fix it?" He looked out the kitchen window at the harbor and at the lit windows of the Whitfield cottage across the water, and he said, "Yeah." But Emma had gone back to the dishes, and the question he hadn't yet answered, the one that kept him up that night, staring at the ceiling, was whether he'd waited too long. Because there were things he didn't know yet. Things about Olivia's work. Things about calls she'd been making when he wasn't there to hear them. Things about an offer that had arrived from 3,000 miles away while he was busy retreating. He didn't know any of it yet. He would. He gave himself one night. That was the deal he made with himself, standing at the kitchen window after Emma went to bed one night to sit with what his daughter had said, to let it settle into the places it needed to reach, and then he was going to do something about it. He was not going to overthink it. He was not going to build another wall around the decision. He was going to wake up Monday morning and go across the harbor and say the things that needed saying. And he believed this completely at 10:30 p.m. By 2 a.m., he was still awake, staring at the ceiling, and the certainty had developed the hairline fractures that certainty always develops in the small hours when there's nothing between a man and his own worst thinking. What was he going to say exactly? What did he have to offer someone like Olivia Bennett, a woman with a career, with professional standing, with a 3-year contract that was only a third of the way through and would take her to the end of it and then somewhere else after that? What was he offering her? A Marina that had just taken a beating, a daughter who was almost a teenager, a man who had proven comprehensively over the past 3 weeks that his first instinct under pressure was to disappear. He fell asleep somewhere around 4 and woke at 6 with the grim flat clarity of insufficient sleep, and made coffee, and told himself he was still going. He didn't go. Not Monday. Something with the insurance adjuster ran long, and by the time it was resolved, it was after dark, and he told himself it wasn't the right moment. Not Tuesday. He had a client pickup at 7 a.m. and a haul-out at noon, and the contractor for the bulkhead showed up 3 hours late and left without finishing, and the whole day was a grinding series of problems that each individually required his full attention, and by 8 p.m. he was too tired to have the conversation he needed to have with any kind of coherence. Wednesday morning, he woke up at 5, got dressed with purpose, walked to the end of his dock, looked at the lit window in the cottage kitchen across the harbor. She was always up early, and stood there for 4 minutes before his phone rang with an equipment supplier crisis that required him to drive to North Charleston. Whoa. By Wednesday afternoon, he had identified with the uncomfortable clarity of a man watching himself do something he can't quite stop, that he was stalling again. Not as dramatically as before. Not cutting off contact, not retreating into silence. Just not going. Finding reasons. Letting the hours fill themselves with legitimate urgencies that he arranged around himself like furniture to hide behind. Emma noticed on Wednesday evening. She didn't say anything. She looked at him across the dinner table with an expression that was so precisely her mother's patient knowing slightly tired that he had to look at his plate. "Tomorrow," he said to his plate. "Okay," Emma said. Thursday morning arrived, and with it, unexpectedly, Jimmy Pace. Jimmy knocked on the shop door at 7:45 with his coffee and the expression of a man who has information he's been sitting on and has decided this is the moment to put it down. Jimmy was 53, had a slip at the marina for 11 years, worked in commercial real estate, and possessed the Charleston Harbor Gossip Network's most reliable node. "Heard something you should probably know," Jimmy said, settling onto the shop stool uninvited. "Morning, Jimmy." "Yeah, the Bennett woman. She got a call last week. Big one. International Marine Infrastructure Group, you know them. They do the major coastal projects. Rotterdam, Singapore, the Dubai waterfront expansion. They want her for a senior design director position. Full package. Starts in February." Ethan went very still. He set down the fitting he'd been working with. "Where?" "Amsterdam." The words sat in the air between them. "How do you know this?" Ethan asked. "Jade. Marcus at the City Harbor office. Olivia had a meeting with him Tuesday to formally document the handoff plan for the rescue station project in case she takes it. She's covering her bases." Jimmy paused. "She hasn't said yes yet, but she's covering her bases." Ethan looked at the fitting on his workbench. "February," he said. 3 months, Jimmy said, give or take. Jimmy finished his coffee, and the silence that followed set the mug on the bench and stood up. "I'm not telling you what to do," he said. "I'm just telling you what I know." He walked to the door. "She's a good woman, Ethan. The kind of good that doesn't come through here very often." He left. Ethan stood in the shop for 7 minutes by the clock on the wall. He knew it was 7 minutes because he watched each one pass with the specific attention of a man whose brain has temporarily suspended all functions except the one that is processing a single piece of information and what it means. Amsterdam. February. 3 months. Bah. She was covering her bases. She was doing the thing a responsible professional person does when there's a life-changing decision in front of them. She was preparing for both outcomes. She was not going to wait forever. Not because she'd given up, but because she was the kind of person who made real decisions and lived inside them rather than hovering at the edges of the possible. She'd told him that herself in August, leaning in his shop doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "I'm not in the habit of pretending things aren't what they are." He had spent 3 months testing the limits of that patience, and those limits, it turned out, had a shape and a deadline, and the deadline had a date attached to it, and the date was coming whether he moved or not. He took his jacket off the hook by the door. He walked out of the shop. He crossed the marina, went past the north dock, took the path around the harbor edge. He knocked on the cottage door at 8:15 a.m. No answer. He knocked again. Nothing. Her truck was gone. He hadn't looked for her truck before he came, which was the kind of thing you do when you finally stopped thinking and started moving, and the moving has outrun the planning. He pulled out his phone, typed, "Can we talk today?" He stared at the message for a moment, then sent it. He walked back to the shop. He picked up the fitting. He put it back down. He walked to the dock. He walked back. At 9:03, his phone buzzed. Working out at the Lighthouse Project on Sullivan's Island. Here until 4. He looked at the message. He typed, "I'll come to you." A pause longer than her usual response time, and then, "Okay." Sullivan's Island was 30 minutes by road. He told Tommy, who was doing gel coat work on a runabout in Slip 2, that he needed 2 hours and to call him only if something was actively sinking. He drove. And the Lighthouse Project was a decommissioned Coast Guard facility that the city had contracted Olivia to assess and redesign as an emergency coordination center, one of 3 anchor points in her rescue station network. He'd heard her talk about it to Emma. He'd never seen it. He parked and found his way to the water side of the structure, where 2 of her project crew were working on the foundation measurements, and Olivia was crouched over a set of drawings spread on a makeshift table, her reading glasses on, talking on her phone. She saw him come around the corner. She held up one finger 1 minute and finished her call without rushing it with the calm completeness of someone who does not perform urgency they don't feel. Then she took her glasses off and folded them and looked at him. "You drove out here," she said. "I needed to say something and I was tired of finding reasons not to." Her expression didn't change. She was very good at waiting. "I know about Amsterdam," he said. Something moved through her face. Not guilt, more like recognition. "Jimmy Pace," she said. "Does it matter?" She exhaled. "No, I wasn't hiding it." She set the glasses down on the drawings. "I was going to tell you. I've been trying to figure out She stopped. Restarted. "I haven't decided anything yet. I know, I'm not here about Amsterdam." He took a breath. "I'm here because my daughter told me something Sunday night that I should have been smart enough to figure out on my own 3 months ago, and because I've been standing still for so long, I think I forgot that moving was an option." She was watching him with the careful attention she gave to things that mattered. "I'm in love with you," he said. "I have been since at least August, probably before that. I know I've been—" He stopped and made himself continue. "I know I've been a disaster about this. I know what 3 weeks of nothing costs, and I'm not going to make excuses for it. I got scared, and I ran, and I let it be quiet, and I told myself it was space, and it wasn't. It was fear. It's always been fear." She didn't speak. Wembo. He kept going because stopping now felt like it would be the most expensive pause of his life. "I can't promise I won't get scared again. That would be a lie, and you've never deserved a lie from me. What I can promise is that I know the difference now between the fear and the thing under the fear. And the thing under it." His voice went rougher on that. He let it. "The thing under it is that I don't want to spend one more day pretending I don't want you here." The silence that followed was the longest of his life and covered approximately 8 seconds of real time. Olivia looked at him. Her jaw tightened slightly and then released. Her eyes were bright in a way that she was very carefully managing. "You drove 30 minutes to tell me that," she said. "I would have driven a lot further." She looked at him for another moment, and then she looked away out at the water, and he could see her working through something, feeling the full weight of it, because she was someone who dealt in full weights rather than partial ones. "I'm not going to Amsterdam," she said. He went absolutely still. "I turned it down 2 days ago." She looked back at him. "Monday morning. I called them and I turned it down." A pause. "Not because of you. I need you to hear that clearly, not because I was waiting for you to show up. I turned it down because I sat with it for a week, and realize that what I want isn't another prestigious project in another city where I land for a year and then leave. I've been doing that for 12 years. I'm tired of it. Her voice was steady, but not without cost. I want to finish what I started here. I want to wake up in the same place for more than 1 year. I want a harbor I know. She stopped. I want a life, Ethan, not a career. I already have a career. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When were you going to tell me?" "When you stopped running long enough to hear it." And he looked at her. This woman who had turned down a career-defining position had made a decision about her own life, rooted entirely in what she wanted, rather than what she thought he needed, had not used it as leverage, or an announcement, or a bid for something from him. Had just done it and waited, and felt the last of the structure he'd built around himself give way with the quiet finality of a tide coming in. He crossed the distance between them. She didn't move toward him, and she didn't move away. She stood her ground, the way she'd been standing it since August, complete and present, and exactly herself. He put his hand against the side of her face, which surprised him because he hadn't planned it, and she closed her eyes for exactly 1 second in a way that cost her something visible, and then she opened them and looked at him straight on. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the 3 weeks, for making you wait, for all of it." "I know," she said, not as absolution, as truth. "I'm going to do better," he said. "I know that too." A pause, a small, real, slightly broken smile. "You already are." He kissed her. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not cinematic. It was the kind of kiss that happens when two people have been circling something true for a very long time and have finally stopped moving and let themselves stand in it, careful and complete and real, in the way that only things that have cost something can be real. Behind them, 20 yards away, one of her crew members cleared his throat loudly and found something urgent to measure in the opposite direction. She pulled back and made a sound that was almost a laugh. He felt it against his jaw. "Your crew is going to talk," he said. "My crew already talks," she said. "Marcus at the harbor office has known about you since September." The dock assessment. "The dock assessment," she confirmed. "I apparently became visibly flustered when he asked why I was in a hurry to get back to the marina." She looked up at him. "I'm not flustered often," he remembered. "Theo." He stood there with his hand still at the side of her face and thought that he had spent 4 years building a life designed specifically to prevent this feeling, and that the feeling was stronger than the design, and that Emma had known it before he did, and that Olivia had known it before Emma, and that he was the last person in Charleston to understand what had been happening to him since the morning a woman he'd never met fished a table leg out of his harbor with a boat hook and waved at him with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. He said, "Come to dinner tonight. Bring your drawings if you want. Emma's been asking about the simulation results." She looked at him with the expression he now understood was what she looked like when she was feeling something she'd decided not to armor open and careful and completely unguarded. Yeah, he said. She came to dinner. Emma opened the door before Olivia knocked, which meant she'd been watching from the window, which meant she had known something was different before either of them said a word. Something in the specific quality of how her father moved through the kitchen, lighter than he'd been in weeks. Actually in the kitchen before 7, rather than still at the shop. She opened the door and looked at Olivia and looked at her father and said with 12-year-old precision, "Finally." Olivia laughed. "I like her," she said. "I know," Ethan said. They ate. They talked. Emma produced the simulation results with the particular pride of someone who has been working on something difficult and knows it's good, and Olivia engaged with it the way she always engaged with Emma's work as real work taken seriously, deserving of real response. At one point, Ethan said something that was technically incorrect about tidal asymmetry, and both of them corrected him simultaneously, and then looked at each other, and he felt something so large and warm move through the kitchen that he had to excuse himself for a glass of water he didn't need. When Emma went upstairs at 9:30, she said goodnight to both of them with an elaborate casualness that fooled no one. Olivia helped him with the dishes. This had happened before, but it felt different now, not charged with the careful neutrality they'd been maintaining, just easy two people in a kitchen at the end of a day. "I need to tell you something," she said, handing him a bowl. "Something I should have told you a while ago." He took the bowl. "Okay. When I moved here, when I took the Charleston contract, it wasn't random." She kept her eyes on the dish she was drying. "I'd had a long conversation with a colleague who'd worked with the city on the prior harbor project. She mentioned the marina on the north side. Mentioned the owner was a single dad who ran a restoration business and knew more about aging coastal timber structures than most engineers she'd met." A pause. "I'd been looking for a project with waterfront residential proximity anyway, but I asked to see the satellite layout of that specific marina before I signed the lease." She looked at him. "I just want you to know that." He processed that for a moment. "You researched the marina before you moved here." "The marina, not you specifically. I didn't know you were—" She stopped. "I didn't know, but I was not entirely surprised by what I found." He thought about a woman in Boston, looking at satellite images of a harbor she'd never seen, making a decision about where to put herself next and the specific shape of what happened after. "You scouted the neighborhood," he said. "Professionally, yes. And personally." She looked at him with the clear, unembarrassed directness that was simply how she was. "I was ready to land somewhere. I was hoping somewhere would be worth landing." A pause. "It was." He set the bowl down on the counter and looked at her. "You are," he said. "Worth landing. In case that's not been entirely clear." And her chin lifted slightly the way it did when something hit her harder than she expected. "It's been clear," she said, "since the morning you drove 30 minutes on a Thursday to say something you were afraid to say." She handed him the last dish. "That was clear." He took the dish. He thought about the doc post she'd found in June about the coffee order she'd learned from his daughter about the engineering assessment that saved him 4 days and $3,000, about the storm, and the photographs by the work lamp, about the night she told him. The truth was starting to cost her too, about Monday morning when she called Amsterdam and said no. All of it adding up to something he could now see in its full shape, not a series of moments, but one long continuous act. A woman paying attention, a woman showing up, a woman choosing every day to be in the specific place she'd decided to be, and waiting with the patient certainty of someone who understood that the right things take the time they take. He had needed more time than most. She had given it. He put the dish away and turned and kissed her again properly, this time in his own kitchen with the light on and the harbor outside the window, and his daughter's simulation results spread on the table, and everything broken by the hurricane slowly, steadily being rebuilt. The weeks that followed were different. Not perfect, not without the occasional stumble moments where old habits moved through him, the instinct to pull back to qualify, to hold something in reserve. He caught them now. He caught them and named them to himself, and more than once when it mattered, he named them out loud to her, which was the hardest thing and also the most important, and each time he did, she received it without making him feel diminished for having needed to say it.
Woske.
She was at the marina 3 evenings a week. She was at Sunday dinners. She was at Emma's soccer games, where she had graduated from appearing quietly in the crowd to sitting next to Ethan on the bleachers with a coffee and a comfort that had stopped requiring any announcement. Tommy Garrett told him at the slip one morning, with the air of a man delivering an obvious verdict, "She's good for this place." "I know," Ethan said. "She's good for you too." "I know that too. Just making sure you know," Tommy said. "Tommy, yeah, I know." Tommy went back to his boat satisfied. December arrived. The rescue station project hit a funding milestone. Olivia got a commendation from the City Harbor Commission that Emma printed out and put on the refrigerator between her science fair ribbon, and a photo of the 3 of them from a November afternoon on the water. all of them squinting into the sun, all of them smiling. One evening in late December, Ethan came home from the shop and found Olivia and Emma in the kitchen, the way he'd found them on that Thursday in September. The same domestic gravity, the same comfortable quiet, the same arrangement of two people who belong in a space together. But different now, in the way that matters. Not careful, not provisional, just there. He stood in the doorway and looked at it. Olivia glanced up. "You're early. Finished the Fleming teak work faster than I expected." He set his jacket on the hook. "What are we making?" "We," Emma said without looking up from the cutting board, "are making chicken soup. You are setting the table." "He can chop the celery," Olivia said. "He's bad at celery," Emma said. "I'm standing right here," Ethan said. "We know," they said in unison, and then looked at each other and laughed at the same time, with the ease of two people who have been in the same orbit long enough to develop their own specific wavelength. He went and chopped the celery. He was bad at it. Neither of them said anything. He stood in his kitchen with his daughter on his left and the woman he loved on his right, and he thought about 4 years of maple syrup on the counter and Saturday mornings alone, and the careful, relentless work of convincing himself that small was the same as safe and safe was the same as good. He had been so wrong about that. And the rightness of the thing he'd almost let go, the specific warmth of this kitchen this evening, this evidence of what had been quietly building since a summer morning, when a woman fished a table leg out of a harbor and told him the name of the thing he'd been missing without even knowing she was doing it, settled into him with the permanence of something that had finally found its place. He had one more thing left to do. He just didn't know yet that it would happen in front of a crowd. The new year arrived the way good things often do after hard ones, quietly without ceremony, with the specific relief of a page-turning. January in Charleston was mild and gray and productive. The marina hummed with the steady rhythm of winter workboats in for annual service engines pulled and inspected fiberglass repairs that the hurricane had generated, waiting in the queue with the patience of things that know their turn is coming. Ethan moved through the days differently than he had 6 months ago. Not lighter exactly. He was not a light man by nature, but less braced, less arranged against the possibility of something good arriving. Olivia noticed it before he said anything about it. She noticed it the way she noticed everything specifically without making a production of the noticing. One evening in mid-January, she looked at him across his kitchen table and said, "You're sleeping better." "What makes you say that?" "You stopped having that look." "What look?" "The one where you're present in the room, but your mind is somewhere it considers safer." She said it simply, not as criticism. "You had it every day when I first got here. You don't have it anymore." He thought about that. When did it stop? She considered. Sometime in November. After the Sullivan's Island conversation. A pause. After you started actually eating dinner instead of just moving food around a plate. He hadn't known she'd noticed the food. He should have known. She noticed everything. "You're going to make me feel observed," he said. "You are observed," she said. "You have been since August. I thought you understood that by now." Shy. He reached across the table and took her hand, which was still something that cost him a small, deliberate act of will, not because he didn't want to, but because the wanting had once felt dangerous and old pathways don't rewrite themselves overnight. He was working on it. Every time he chose the reaching instead of the pulling back, the pathway got a little clearer. That was how it worked. He was learning to trust that. The Waterfront Community Center project came to him in February, not from the city, but from Olivia. She brought it to Sunday dinner, a rolled set of preliminary drawings and a 2-page summary she put on the table between the soup pot and the bread basket, with the casual confidence of someone who has thought something through and knows it's right. "The Callaway Building," she said. "Corner of East Bay and Longitude. You know it." "I know it," Ethan said. He'd known the Callaway Building his whole life, an abandoned 1920s waterfront warehouse that had sat vacant through 3 separate redevelopment proposals. Each one collapsed before the first nail was pulled. It's a wreck. It's a structure with excellent bones, significant historical character, and a position on the harbor that is genuinely unrepeatable. She tapped the drawings. The city has a community development grant cycle that closes in April. I've been talking to the Harbor Commission. They want to put a community center there, marine education, small event space, a resource room for the fishing families in the North District. They need a structural partner. She looked at him. Someone who knows historic coastal construction. Someone the community trusts.
Yeah.
He looked at the drawings. He looked at her. You want to build this together. I want to restore this together, she said with the precision of someone for whom the distinction matters. There's a difference. Emma looked up from her homework at the other end of the table. It would be really cool, she offered with the studied neutrality of someone trying not to appear invested in the outcome.
Be my.
He pulled the drawings toward him. He looked at the structure analysis. She'd already run the preliminary load calculations, the phased restoration plan broken into segments a small operation could manage without stretching beyond capacity. She hadn't proposed this tonight. She'd been working on it for weeks, quietly fitting the pieces together, making sure it was real before she brought it to him. That was her. She never came to him with possibilities. She came with plans. April's not much time to put together a grant proposal, he said. I've already drafted the structural narrative. I need your business history and the community relationships. 2 weeks of work, maybe 3. She was watching him with the steady patience that he now recognized as her particular form of certainty. She already knew the answer. She was waiting for him to get there. He looked at the drawings one more time. He thought about what it would mean, not just the project, but the shape of the thing. 2 names on a proposal. 2 sets of expertise building something that neither of them could build alone. Something broken becoming whole again, on the same harbor where they'd both arrived separately and ended up in the same place. Okay, he said. Emma made a small sound that was technically not a cheer. Olivia smiled at her drawings in a way she probably thought he didn't see. He saw. Bah. The grant proposal took 3 weeks and a significant portion of 2 people's February. They worked at his kitchen table most evenings. Olivia on the structural and architectural documentation. Ethan on the operational history and community partnership letters he collected from the fishing families in the North District, from the Harbor Association, from Dr. Harmon, from Tommy Garrett, who wrote in his particular grammatically creative style the most genuinely enthusiastic letter of support Ethan had ever read. They submitted it on a Thursday afternoon in late March. Olivia hit send on the city portal and sat back in her chair and let out a breath that contained several weeks of concentrated effort. Then she looked at Ethan. Now we wait, she said. You hate waiting, he said. He knew this about her. Now she was decisive and productive, and the waiting phases of large projects cost her more than the working ones. I do hate waiting, she confirmed. Distract me. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held his. They stayed like that for a while, not talking, in the specific, comfortable quiet that had become one of his favorite things, the silence of 2 people who have earned each other's company. It's a good proposal, he said. It's an excellent proposal, she said. There she is. There I always am, she said. He laughed. She looked at him when he laughed the way she still sometimes looked at him when he laughed, like it was something she was saving, and didn't say anything more. The grant came through on a Tuesday morning in mid-April, and Ethan found out about it not from Olivia, but from Emma, who had apparently been monitoring the City Development Office announcement page on her phone, and appeared at the shop door at 3:15, with her backpack still on, and her phone thrust forward like evidence. You got it, Emma said, the full amount. I just saw the announcement. Then he took the phone, read the announcement twice, felt something happen in his chest that was clean and clear and entirely good. He called Olivia. She answered on the first ring. I know, she said before he spoke. I literally just saw it. I'm standing in the middle of the Harbor Commission lobby and I may have said something unprofessional. How unprofessional? I said yes out loud, to nobody. Marcus from the Harbor office was nearby and applauded. He was smiling so hard it felt strange on his face. Not strange in a bad way, just unfamiliar in the way that things feel when you've been without them long enough that their return takes a moment to register. Dinner tonight, he said. The place on East Bay. Bring your appetite. I always bring my appetite. A pause, and her voice shifted from the bright particular energy of a professional win to something quieter and more direct. Ethan. Yeah, we're going to build something good. He looked at the harbor from the shop doorway. He looked at the water, and the docks and the boats, and the whole complicated, salt-worn, beloved shape of a life that had been broken and put back together more than once. Yeah, he said. We are. The Callaway restoration began in June, and would take in its full scope the better part of 14 months. But it moved with the particular momentum of a project that has the right people behind it, not fast, but steady. Never stopping. Always forward. Emma turned 13 in July and demanded as her birthday request to be allowed to contribute to the marine education component of the center's programming plan, which she had apparently been drafting since May without telling anyone. Olivia read the draft and told her it was better than things she'd seen from adult consultants, which Emma received with the careful composure of someone who was extremely proud and determined not to show it. Ethan watched this exchange from across the kitchen and felt something so full and warm it required a moment of looking somewhere else before he trusted his face. August brought the one-year anniversary of Hurricane Miriam, and with it, the particular Charleston ritual of community storm remembrance, a harbor ceremony the Historical Society organized every year for major weather events. Ethan was asked to say a few words as a marina owner and community figure. He said them briefly and meant them completely, talking about what it cost to rebuild and what it meant to do it with people who showed up and stayed. He didn't look at Olivia when he said it. He didn't have to. Half the harbor was looking at her anyway. Afterward, Tommy Garrett shook his hand and said, "That was decent, Carter," which from Tommy constituted something approaching a standing ovation. September came, and with it a moment that arrived without announcement the way the most important moments tend to. And he had been working late in the Callaway building a Thursday evening, the contractors gone, the space quiet with the particular hush of a place being restored. The first section of the main floor was structurally complete, and he was doing a final walk of the framing before the drywall crew came Friday morning. He was carrying his flashlight and his punch list and thinking about an access corridor on the east side that he wanted to revisit before sign-off, and he found the beam entirely by accident. It was a structural timber near the south wall. Original 1920s, longleaf pine. The kind of wood that doesn't exist anymore in useful quantities, dense and dark with age and salt. The contractor had flagged it as a retention piece in the restoration plan. It was staying in place, load-bearing part of the building's authentic skeleton. And it was in the position Ethan stood and looked at it for a long moment that would be most visible from the main entrance when people walked in. Right there. Eye level. Unavoidable. He stood in front of that beam for 11 minutes. Then he called Emma. "I need to ask you something," he said when she answered. "Okay," she said with the attention of someone who can hear in his voice that this is not a routine call. "There's a beam in the south wall of the Callaway building. Original timber. It's going to be the first thing people see when they walk through the main doors." A pause. "Okay? I want to put a plaque on it." He stopped. "I want to put her name on it." Emma was quiet for exactly long enough that he wondered if the call had dropped. Then she said quietly and completely, "Dad, yes, absolutely yes." "It has to be right," he said. "The words have to be right." "Then you write them," Emma said. "You know what to say." "I don't know that I do. Don't know that I... You told me once that Mom used to say, You were the kind of man who says exactly the right thing when it matters and absolutely nothing when it doesn't. A pause. This matters. He stood in front of the beam and thought about that. He thought about a woman who showed up in a harbor with a drafting table and dropped part of it in the water and fixed it herself without asking for help. He thought about dock posts and engineering assessments and granola bars split without discussion and kitchen lights on at 10 p.m. and a phone call to Amsterdam and what it meant to turn something down, not for someone else, but for the truest version of yourself. He wrote the words that night. He called the metal workshop Friday morning. He told no one except Emma. The grand opening of the Callaway Waterfront Community Center fell on a Saturday in October, exactly 16 months after the hurricane, exactly 15 months after a 12-year-old girl had stood at a kitchen sink and told her father the most important truth of his adult life. Half of Charleston came. That was not hyperbole. The Harbor Commission, the fishing families from the North District, the Historical Society Dr. Harmon, who drove from Mount Pleasant and shook Ethan's hand for a long time without speaking. Marcus from the Harbor Office, who had apparently developed a genuine investment in how this particular story resolved itself. Tommy Garrett in a sport coat that had last seen action at a function in 2019. Olivia stood at the entrance in the October light, receiving congratulations with the particular grace of someone who is genuinely moved and determined not to be overwhelmed by it. She had designed the entrance sequence herself, the way the doors opened, the angle of light, through the restored transoms, the specific sight line from the threshold to the main hall. She knew what people would see when they walked in. She had not known about the beam. Ethan waited.
No.
He waited through the remarks from the harbor commissioner. He waited through the applause and the ribbon cutting and the first wave of people moving through the doors. He watched Olivia accept a handshake from a city council member and speak to two of the fishing family representatives she'd met in January, and lean down to talk to a child who was interested in the model rescue station display Emma had built for the education corner. He waited until the crowd had settled into the main hall, and the noise had organized itself into the particular hum of a successful public event. Then he crossed the room to her. "I need to show you something," he said. She looked at his face. She read something there that made her go still. "Okay," she said. He took her to the south wall. The plaque was bronze mounted on the original longleaf pine at exactly eye level, at the precise angle that caught the afternoon light through the east transoms. It was not large. It didn't need to be large. It read, "Some people save buildings, some save boats, and some quietly save hearts." Below the words, her name, Olivia Bennett, Marine Architect, in recognition of what she built here and what she made possible. He watched her read it. She read it once. He saw her jaw tighten. She read it again slower. Her hand came up and touched the edge of the plaque. Not the words, just the frame, the way you touch something you want to confirm is real. She turned to him, and her eyes were bright in a way she was not managing at all. "Ethan," she said. "It came out rough. You built this," he said. "All of it. The proposal, the structure, the education program, all of it started with you driving across a harbor and deciding this place was worth your time." He looked at her. "I needed you to know that it is, that you are, that I know exactly what it cost you to stay and what it meant that you did." She pressed her lips together for a moment. "You had this made without telling me." "I had help," he said. She glanced across the room. Emma was standing approximately 30 feet away, with the carefully maintained expression of someone who is absolutely not watching them and has not been watching them for the last 4 minutes. Olivia made a sound that was more laugh than cry, but contained elements of both. "Your daughter," she said. "She wrote the words," he said. "I edited them slightly." "They're perfect," she said. She stopped. "How am I supposed to respond to this?" "You don't have to respond," he said. "I didn't do it for a response. I did it because in 10 years and 20 years and however long this building stands, I want there to be a record. A permanent one. That says she was here. She chose this place. She built something real, and she made the people in it better. He looked at her straight. That's worth putting on a wall. She looked at him for a long moment with everything she felt fully visible on her face. The love and the relief and the particular emotion that belongs to people who have waited for something difficult and true and have finally received it completely. I love you, she said. It was the first time she'd said it directly, plainly, without armor. I know, he said. Then, I love you too. I've been saying it in every other possible way for months, and I should have just said the words. So, there they are. She laughed the sudden clear laugh he'd heard across the harbor that first summer, and catalogued, without knowing he was doing it, the laugh that had gotten into him early and stayed. She put her hand against his chest the way she had on the Sullivan's Island dock, and he covered it with his. And the room was full of people. Someone had started the sound system in the education corner, and there was music coming from somewhere. Outside, the harbor light was doing the October thing it does in Charleston. Gold and low and very clear. The kind of light that makes everything look like something worth keeping. The crowd applauded something the commissioner had said, something from the far end of the hall. Emma appeared at Ethan's elbow with the timing of someone who had been waiting for a pause in the emotional weather. Well, she said. Well, Olivia said, and reached out and pulled Emma in with her free arm, which Emma allowed with the theatrical reluctance of a teenager who absolutely wanted the hug. The three of them stood in front of the plaque on the south wall of the Callaway building while the opening ceremony continued around them, and Ethan looked at the words his daughter had written and thought about a July morning the year before, and a dock post, and the particular way a person shows up, not with announcements, not with requirements, just with presence and patience, and the quiet daily choice to be exactly where they are. He had been the last one to understand what was happening. He had been the one who needed the most time, and made the most mistakes, and required his 12-year-old daughter to tell him the truest thing he'd heard in 4 years before he could finally move. He was not going to waste what came next. In November, he asked her to move into the house on the harbor side. He did not do it dramatically. He did it at the kitchen table on a Wednesday evening with Emma present, because it involved Emma, and because there was nothing about this that needed to be separated from the life it was becoming part of. He said he'd been thinking about it for a while. He said the cottage lease was up in December. He said he wanted to stop dividing mornings into who was on which side of the harbor. Emma said before Olivia could answer, I already cleaned out the hall closet for your drafting supplies. Olivia looked at the 12-year-old across the table. You cleaned a closet? 2 weeks ago, Emma said. I've been waiting. Ethan looked at his daughter. You cleaned a closet? The drafting table barely fits in the cottage, Emma said with perfect practical composure. It's a logistics issue. Olivia covered her mouth with one hand. Her shoulders were shaking. She looked at Ethan, and the look contained everything, the gratitude and the love, and the disbelief at the particular shape her life had taken from a dropped table leg, and a boat hook, and a summer harbor, and a man who took longer than he should have, but arrived finally completely without reservation. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. She moved in on a Saturday in December. It took 4 hours and 2 trips and the enthusiastic, not always helpful assistance of Tommy Garrett. The drafting table went in the hall closet space, which Emma had in fact cleared and even lightly sanded and repainted for the purpose. Olivia stood in front of it for a long moment when she saw it. She sanded the wall, Olivia said quietly. She did, Ethan said. I'm going to cry in your hallway. Our hallway, he said. Che? She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying. The word had done what words do when they're true, which is land with the permanent weight of a thing that cannot be walked back and doesn't need to be. Emma appeared in the hallway with a sandwich. Lunch, she said, holding it out to Olivia. You haven't eaten since breakfast, I checked. Olivia took the sandwich. She looked at this girl, this extraordinary, practical, clear-eyed girl, who had lost her mother at 8, and spent 4 years quietly making space for whoever her father needed to become, who had cleared a closet 2 weeks in advance of being asked, and now stood in a hallway with a sandwich she'd made because she paid attention to people. The way her mother must have paid attention, the way her father was learning to pay attention, the way this whole family was teaching itself slowly to be in the world with its whole heart again. "Thank you," Olivia said. The words carried more than they said. Emma gave her the sandwich, gave her a look that was pure affection, managed with maximum composure, and went back to the kitchen. Ethan watched her go. He thought about the morning after the table leg when he'd rolled out from under a hull and looked across the harbor at a woman standing at the edge of a dock and raised his chin and went back inside. He thought about all the days after that, the dock post, the coffee, the engineering assessment, the storm, the plaque, the Sunday dinners, the photographs by the work lamp, the Sullivan's Island dock, the kitchen light on at 10 p.m. He thought about 3 weeks of silence that cost more than he'd admitted, and a conversation that had cost him everything comfortable and given him back everything real. He thought about what it means to be the kind of person who takes the long way to something true and still manages to arrive. Some loves arrive with fireworks. Some arrive in the middle of a hurricane. Some arrive carrying blueprints on a summer morning and drop a table leg in the harbor and wave at you from across the water with the calm, certain patience of someone who already knows how the story ends. Ethan Carter had needed longer than most. He had gotten there, and in the house on the harbor with his daughter in the kitchen, and the woman he loved in the hallway, and the plaque on the south wall of a building that had been broken and made whole again. The story did not end. It simply finally, properly began.